Jordan, thank you so much for joining me on this chat. We've probably known each other for a couple of years now, actually, I think, and I've always really enjoyed our conversations together, our book recommendations, or rather your book recommendations to me, and our joint podcast recommendations generally. And in a way, I was really interested to chat to you about, the book idea that I've been talking to you a little bit about, which is, well, the title is called Build the Invisible. And what I'm sort of interested in sort of exploring with lots of people I'm trying to interview, is this idea around, how do you build your knowledge base? How do you go about developing your network? How do you get into the industry? I know we're in sports, but if it's music or TV or film or, fashion, whatever else it might be, the industry of your choice, the industry that you've got a passion and want to sort of delve into more and have a motivation for. You're obviously making your way, making great strides in the sports and entertainment space generally. How did you go about doing what you're doing now? And a lot of people that I've said, just a caveat, have said, I've been lucky because I was in here at this at the right time and otherwise. And I'm always interested in this idea of luck. But before we get into there, maybe you can just sort of explain how you managed to find that way in and that pathway, and sort of how you went about doing it, by chance or by strategy or a combination of it all.
Yeah, I think it's definitely probably a combination of the two. Start with, this wasn't ever where I thought I'd end up or what I'd be doing, and it's just one of those things that I think life has a funny way of kind of handing you opportunities that you can either take or whatever it might be. But
what did you want to do? Sorry, then, what was your idea?
I didn't know was the honest answer. So I always loved my sport, playing it, watching it, whatever that might be. But equally, I loved school and loved my academics. I was a bit of a nerd at school, so I went on to kind of study physics and maths at university, again, not really knowing what I wanted to do with that, but figured I was quite good at it. I found it quite interesting, and that's kind of like the way our education system's set up, that's the way it kind of encourages you to go along. And I think on that note, I think it was in one of your emails actually around the top 25 TED Talks, but there's one on education that like everyone should watch, because for me that just hits the nail on the head. And I was lucky in that academics and exams and all that kind of thing just worked for me. Like I was quite good at memorizing formula, which was basically what you had to do to excel in those subjects at that point. So that kind of almost dictated that path for me, and suddenly found myself at uni and enjoying it and loving it, and kind of almost putting off that what's next. Kind of spent a bit of time through my degree doing research and all that kind of thing. I was just like, I don't really think further academics is for me. I still loved kind of playing football and being out and about, and it just didn't quite get my juices flowing, for use of a better phrase. So I then was kind of back home one summer chatting to my dad, and he did the kind of dad thing, like, you should get some work experience or you should do this. And I was like, oh, but I just want to kind of go on holiday or whatever. But I was like, okay, cool. So I was like, right, okay, I guess if I'm studying maths, I'll do something financy, or that's kind of where it naturally led if I didn't want to go down the kind of more physics research led path. So I figured if I was going to go and, I don't know, do some like voluntary work experience, which again, I was fortunate enough to be able to do. I live within commuting distance of London. I know not everyone has those opportunities, and I was staying with my parents at the time. But again, I think that's where the element of luck comes into it, and how these things go. But I was like, if I'm gonna kind of do some free work experience and kind of get myself in somewhere, and I know organize someone's paper clips or whatever they have you do, make cups of tea, I figured I'd want to do it somewhere interesting at least. And pretty much everywhere has a finance department, so you just have to kind of scan the opportunities. So I just sports agencies or sports, I didn't even really know what an agency was at the time, but sports companies would have probably been what I'd have searched. And CSM fell out of that, and funnily enough, a lot of people get in touch to kind of work with the athlete management team or the brands team, but very few people actually want to come and do work experience for the finance team. So I think they were just really glad to have an extra set of hands, and were almost a bit shocked that I was kind of asking to help with the finance side of things. They're like, oh, you sure you've not got the wrong department or whatever? But so I think that was, again, bit of luck, bit of timing, bit of opportunity for me. And again, the next element of luck to come into it was that at the time I was doing 2 weeks work experience. So again, just helping do a lot of the kind of just admin, inputting data, etc. But the finance team sat next to the athlete management team at the time in the office. So again, just the way it worked. And one of the guys I was working with, he actually did a lot of the finance for the players as well. So just through that, and I mean, as everyone tells you, go in, be enthusiastic, talk to people, listen in to what everyone's saying. So I just got chatting and whatnot to the people around me. Was lucky enough that they were all open to have conversations and give me the time of day. And there's work drinks on a Friday, and you kind of go down and start to kind of humanize and engage with people and make yourself a person rather than just the work experience kid, which again is kind of important. And then I guess this is where the luck falls away, and the kind of like you have to start thinking, and then it's like, okay, this is quite interesting. I didn't know this existed. How can I provide value, or how can they must get work experience people through the door every week of the summer. How can I kind of leave my mark? And I think that came up quite a lot in the couple of weeks that I was there. It was when social media was really starting to kind of kick in, and a lot of the agents just in that week alone had calls from their players being like, what's this Twitter thing about? Like, how can I monetize it? What's going on? Like, and I kind of heard a few kind of failed attempts at responding to that. And just by the nature of me being a bit younger, I was had a bit more of a foundation of what social media was and what it was becoming and how it was working. So I was like, little light bulb moment. I was like, okay, cool. This is where I can maybe kind of help. And so started to kind of chat to the guys and just be like, look, is there anything I could do to be useful? And kind of then actually ended up coming up with like a cheat sheet to like Twitter, like really simple stuff, which now kind of everyone takes for granted, but at the time, like setting up a Twitter account and what is Twitter, what is a hashtag? Like there was all these things that were completely foreign to like rugby players or footballers or whatever. So just by kind of creating some materials, that then meant that they invited me back at the end of the summer to kind of complete that work. So they're like, there's certain rules about how many weeks you can do work experience. They're like, actually, if you can kind of come back in September time when it's kind of a bit more relevant for sport, it would be really good to have you back for a couple of weeks. So that's kind of where it kind of went. Did a couple more weeks, got to know everyone a bit more. And then I went and did my final year of uni and didn't actually really think about it again after that, to be honest. I kind of always wanted to kind of go traveling and all this kind of thing, and thought, oh, okay, cool, that's good. I've got that there just in case anything comes of it. But still, the penny didn't quite drop that this could be a real serious career opportunity. So I actually wanted to go to Canada and do a ski season and all this kind of thing. And so didn't really give the kind of CSM or career element too much thought. And I think, again, that might have been another bit of luck or a bit of a blessing that I almost then didn't try too hard, I guess, at that point to kind of fake value or like force being in touch. But I always knew it's smart to stay in touch with people, so I would find reasons to kind of connect, but I was never asking for anything. I never actually asked for a job or asked for something from them. I always just got in touch when something relevant came up. And I think that, again, maybe I kind of knew it inherently, but I think that probably served me quite well in keeping that relationship the right way round. And then when I graduated, I just, again, as you kind of do over the years, got in touch. So a lot of people just saying, cool, I graduated, just to let you know, survived uni and now going to try and take on the big bad world. And again, this is probably my biggest element of luck to the story, but someone had just handed in their notice from the team. So there was a gap there, which again, bit of luck, bit of timing, but I guess I'd had to have done the kind of groundwork with the value I'd provided before for them to be like, consider me or invite me in to kind of have a chat and see if I was interested. And it became one of those things that when you kind of sat in an office, it's got an F1 car in the foyer and everyone's just chatting sport and there's big like screens with Sky Sports on everywhere, and someone's like, are you interested in kind of working here? You're like, okay, I guess traveling can wait. And I was like, this is like, Canada's not going anywhere, but this is meant to be kind of thing. So yeah, then took the opportunity with both hands and kind of have been there ever since, basically. And that's now like 4 years later.
So I'd just be fascinated to dig into a few things there. I was just writing notes. It wasn't I was doing anything else actually, but I was just writing notes on just a couple of things you were saying and taking it in slightly different directions. Because it's interesting, a lot of people that I've spoken to so far have been like, timing and luck. And I always think a bit of that is sort of self-deprecating where, as much as I think it does play that part, that you got to put yourself in the best position to be able to have luck to take advantage of. So, for example, when you said, that you chose the finance team of a sports agency, I can't imagine anybody would have done that in a way, or too many people do that. But actually, it's a great tactic, which is find the department in a particular area that interests you and go from there, which is exactly as you said, which I found brilliant. And if then the player rep team then sits next to the finance department, then you start networking from within rather than being that external person that doesn't know how an organization works. So I almost think like thinking outside the box of being like, well, I'll just go and make, as you said, like they didn't understand why you would want to go and get work experience there was actually a really, really good tip of find the course of least resistance, which I thought was a really good one sometimes. And you may have inadvertently found it, but that's a really cool one. And the other thing that you talked about, which I'd be really interested in your views on, is you talked about the luck of timing when that person resigned and then there was that job opportunity. But I think firstly, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you hadn't done a good job, first of all, in that after second year of uni, if you hadn't kept in touch and come back and showed value, if you hadn't emailed them and said, by the way, I finished university, and then them saying, oh, actually, we've got a possible job role for you, that's still, you might not think it is, but in my mind, that's a hell of a lot of proactivity on your part that you class as luck, which I think is quite a different thing.
Yeah, I think that's where the combination comes in. I think you can make your own luck to an extent, but I think also you do need a little bit of, like, even if that person had handed in their resignation a month earlier, they might have hired someone in before me, or vice versa. So there is a little element of that, but then, yeah, like I say, you've got to lay the groundwork, and you've got to be prepared that when those few things do align, then you can go. And it's not always going to be the case, and it's not always going to happen first time, I guess, but at some point it will, and it's just believing in that as well, I think.
And can I ask about that there's other one point that you talked about there, which I want to just touch on, which is, some of the book and some of these talks I think will be hopefully be real value, especially when I'm talking to people like yourselves about when people are going into companies for the first time and trying to make the right impression. And then you were talking about how you would say the thing, you would say the things everyone else would say, like, you would do that internal networking, you would start building relationships with people, you'd be inquisitive, you'd be, as you mentioned the example with Twitter. Are there particular things that you were thinking about during there, or you can sort of recall from that time of being, right, I need to be really proactive in certain ways of how to go about not making a name for myself in the business, but just building relationships enough to understand how things are working and to, exactly as you said, try and offer some value?
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me as well, being a female in a very heavily male dominated environment, I'm still not perfect at it. It's still something you try and figure out the whole time, but it's a really hard balance to find in terms of you can't be kind of like one of the lads. I mean, that's kind of my opinion, but if you're trying to be like that too much, it can almost kind of be to your detriment. So there's a really interesting balance to strike. And I think, again, that's where I grew up with two brothers, and our family friends have got three sons, and I grew up next door to them. So 5 brothers for argument's sake. And so I think, yeah, I just looked at it as, I mean, even to this day, my team is still I think I'm the only female in the 2 teams I sit across. So it's very much the same thing for now. But I treated it like I was chatting to my brothers, because I was like, okay, well, I'm lucky in that I love football, and pretty much 99% of guys can chat football. If they're in a sports agency, that can probably tick up to 100, to be honest. And so, yeah, you just find a common ground with people, and I think you make yourself a human being. I think maybe one of the things that I'm aware of and need to get better of is being a bit more vulnerable, a bit more open with people, because when you first go in there, you don't want to show any kind of weaknesses. You want to be this kind of finished, polished product that they can kind of be like, yeah, that fits perfectly in our organization. But I do think showing value and providing knowledge, but also being able to admit that you don't know everything. Again, it's a fine balance to strike, and your kind of own personality will shine through. But yeah, and I think this goes more to kind of when I first started, but I remember being sat in meetings and feeling like, oh my God, I haven't said anything yet. Like, I need to say something. Otherwise, people will think that I don't know anything or whatever. And then you almost find yourself saying something for the sake of saying something, which my boss, who's been my boss and kind of mentor the whole way through, one of his like earliest pieces of advice was just, he kind of said it pretty bluntly, but it was like, you've got two ears and one mouth for a reason, which is a fairly kind of common phrase, I guess. But he's like, especially at the start, just listen. He's like, if you've got something to say it. And he's like, and when you do, it will then be impactful. But he's like, for now, just take in as much as possible. Like, no one's expecting you to have the answers or to say anything, so just learn, take it all in. So I think I've gone completely off tangent there, but
no, it's exactly right. And it was just not exactly right. It's exactly what the type of point, which was, you know, I hope you don't mind me asking as well, because a lot of that seems to be like, how do you fit in or not fit in? That's what it almost
ultimately
like.
And that's what a lot of it is how do you because all business is people, right? I mean, I do a lot of selling, a lot of sales, and at the end of the day, it comes down to people. And a CMO one place might move to another company and become a CMO another place, and it's not uncommon to find that, say, ex-CMO used to sponsor Chelsea Football Club, he then moves to somewhere else, and suddenly this company sponsors Chelsea Football Club. Like, it's people as well. So I think finding commonalities with people and kind of going back to that when you're first going into a business, and try and just be interested in people, like ask them about their family, their kids, what they do when they're not at work. They speak about work all day, so it's okay to ask them non-work related questions too, would be something, because then you have something in common. And if you remember that stuff, that's even better, because then next time you kind of really relate to them. And then I think that's also taking those opportunities when you are there to network and communicate with people, whether that be in a pre-COVID world, after work drinks, or first thing I did was find out if they played five-a-side football, which luckily they did. And so I was like, right, I want to get involved with that. Because the best way you make mates and you get to know people is through playing sport, in my opinion, or in my experience. So some of my best mates I've made through playing sports. So I was like, right, if I can start playing sport with the people around me, then that just levels you up, and it gives you something again to chat about that's a bit more lighthearted when that's kind of needed throughout the day. So
no, I completely agree. Or as our friendship developed, you started giving me some good book recommendations, like
for sure,
Daniel Pink's To Sell Is Human, which is one of my favorite books, and actually something I refer to quite a bit in one of my chapters about. It's the bit where he talks about the word yet, like you haven't done something yet is not a consequence. Basically, it's almost like, just because you can't do it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And that yet word becomes very optimistic in his approach, which I really liked.
Yeah, for sure. And have you read Atomic Habits? Like, do you read a lot of James Clear? Because there's a lot of James Clear. I love James Clear, like his newsletter and stuff. I think it's brilliant. But a lot of that trickles through, and I was like, he's either very similar-minded or he's also read it. So yeah.
No, I completely agree. So I've got this app called Blinkist that I think I've mentioned to you, and I've read Atomic Habits on Blinkist, which I really enjoyed. And there's another guy called BJ Fogg, who is a Harvard professor, and he talks about his the reason why habit forming is so difficult is all around. Quite a nice segue into what we're going to talk about in a second. Is all around motivation. A lot of the time is actually inherently linked to your own personality, i.e. You can be very motivated, but it's sometimes quite difficult to be motivated over a long period of time to do something. For most people, you are the exception, and we'll come on to that in a second.
I don't know about that.
But what what Fogg talks about is trying to make very, very, very small changes to established habits. So, for example, his example is, it's a bit of an odd one, but quite good at the same time, is that he said whenever he wanted to lose a bit of weight and actually become a bit more physically fit, every time he went to the toilet, he would do 2 push-ups afterwards.
Yeah, no, he must have been interviewed by someone who I've listened to at some point, but yeah, I've come across that one before as well.
Which I really liked, and it sort of resonated to an extent that I actually do that now as well. I'm like, it's a really good thing. Like, it's the power of the compound power of things, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. If nothing else, it just continually reminds you of that element as well. It's fascinating.
Exactly, and I know, and I've just got it here. I mean, you can see it. I've literally got my mat, my yoga mat there out. I know if I have it out, I'm more likely to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's those
all the good stuff.
But I think the bit I'd like to ask you on habits, only because what you did over the beginning of an end of lockdown was obviously something which was the forming of a new habit, even though obviously you were really into your exercise and football and other outdoor activities, was, I'll let you say, but you ran for 100 days straight. I think, is that right?
Yeah, so I did 10K every day for 100 days.
Which is absolutely fantastic, and took pictures of yourself each day on which numbers you were.
Yeah, that was quite funny actually, because it was one of those things that I never really knew what it was going to become, and the numbers started off as purely for my dad. Like, that I just used to send them to my dad every morning, and I thought it was quite a nice thing. And then I was like, oh, if I ever get around to putting this anywhere, I'll use them. But I thought it was kind of I wanted to, again, I read a lot around consistency and habits at the time, and I was like quite interested in seeing how consistent I could be with something, or a consistent challenge, because it's not until you undertake something like that, of having to do something every day, that you understand and appreciate the difficulty. And it's usually at the point that you give up that you never really get past that point. And so I was like, well, if I set this as a target and it's during lockdown, and what it did help me do, again, it set a routine, and it kept me sane through lockdown if nothing else. And then it kind of grew from there, and people became interested, and managed to kind of raise some really good money for some good causes as well. And then, yeah, so something that became me sending pictures of numbers to my dad, and then got halfway and was like, I might actually be able to do this. So then I started kind of telling a few more people, to be fair.
But then, so if you can, tell me about that consistency and difficulty, because I think that's exactly the point that I've sort of read quite a lot about, which is, was it, you say obviously it wasn't right in the beginning that you decided you were going to do those 100-day run for those 100 days, but ultimately at what point was the first day, and just because it's a wider sort of point to try and work out, were you thinking, I can't be bothered, but I'm still going to do it? And what was the motivation in your brain? Was it a positive, I've got to do it, or was it a negative, that I don't want to let someone down, or I should just be doing it because I'd be embarrassed? I mean, just get fascinated into the element of a habit becoming a positive part, or trying to satisfy a negative insecurity.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think the reason I didn't tell many people to start with is because I didn't want that to be my motivation. I didn't want to be motivated. I wanted it to be something that I knew I could do for me. And I thought that was quite interesting to be like, okay, I want to see how and what motivates me to get up in the morning and do this. I don't want to be plastering all over social media and all that kind of thing. This is kind of like, I want to see what it's like. So I think that in the first instance that kind of happened. Again, with lockdown, there wasn't much else going on, so it was a really positive thing. It got me out of the house in the mornings. I was running, I was feeling good. It was summer, the weather was nice. I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then it probably hit day 20. So I'd done 20 10Ks, and I mean, there's only so many directions you can run from your flat. And I was like, oh God, like it was just the monotony of it was suddenly kicking in. And I tried to do different things, like doing different repeats, like 1 mile, like quicker than the others, and all that kind of, like, tried to mix it up as best I could. But there comes to a point where you are just doing the same thing over and over again. And so yeah, that became really tough. And then around day 20 or so, it suddenly dawned on me that I was like, right, if I want to hit that 100, I've got another 80 days to go. And I was like, and then I stupidly did the calculation in my head, and it wasn't until like July that would come along. And I was like, what have I done? But then it was almost at that point with no return. I was like, well, if I can't remember who phrased something like this to me or whatever the quote was, but there's too many quotes swimming around in my brain. But it's like, if I stop now, if I ever want to do this again, I've got to run 20 plus 80. Whereas if I just keep going now, all I've got to do is run 80. So it was like, I'm already at that point where I might as well just get on with it. And I'm lucky that I like running. It reinforced a load of positive habits, like listening to podcasts, getting outside in the morning, which is like one of my big ones. Is I hate going straight from bed to eat breakfast and then sit at my desk. I'll always try and get out for a walk or a run or a cycle, even if it's 5-10 minutes. Like just getting outside, I find a really, really positive thing, even if it's raining or whatever. I find once you're out there, it's usually not that bad. We live in London, we don't live in like some Arctic conditions too frequently. So yeah, that was the kind of the motivator for me. And I think it was probably, again, like a balance of the two, like elements of it creep in where you're like, I don't want to let myself down. I don't want to, like, for me, like let my dad or mum or like just a small group of friends that I told, like the embarrassment factor of being like, I didn't do it. And again, that kind of pride of like, they see me as like the like one who likes running and active, and then suddenly that meddles with like your identity a little bit if you suddenly can't do this thing. And so luckily, like, yeah, it just kind of kicked in. And then it probably, you kind of go through all the doubts and like, can I do this? Oh my God, it's harder, it's boring, da, da, da. You probably have a bit of a negative cycle. And then you kind of flip it on its head and be like, actually, this is really cool. This actually gives me something else to talk to people on work calls about that isn't COVID. I've listened to as many podcasts as I've done runs now. Like, when would I ever have listened? Like, it would have taken me ages to get through 20 podcasts, but I've done 20 podcasts in 20 days now. I'd get in and I'd actually do some stretching or do like the stuff you're supposed to do after a run because of the extra time and stuff without the commute. So I think once I kind of like taught myself out of those like slightly negative kind of areas, I then just focused on like, right, this is a really cool and positive thing. And then it actually so happened that my neighbour was working with the Tribe Foundation, who do a lot against modern slavery. And I kind of told him what I was doing. He's like, oh, that would be an amazing thing to kind of partner with Tribe. And I didn't really know about them or what they were up to at the time. So again, a bit of luck, a bit of chance. We got chatting, and then we started to kind of use it as a platform to raise some money. They do lots of running and cycling things. So they've got like a good community there. And I was like, and then once you've kind of got, again, that kind of good cause underpinning everything, then it's like, A, I can't let them down, but B, this is for a really good cause. So let's crack on. And then as the lockdown eased slightly, it became a really nice thing because then friends would come join me for runs. And it was like, became a bit more of a social element as well. And on the last run, we kind of like did it in little pods and did some laps at Battersea Park. And yeah, it was great. So yeah, I think a blend of negative and positive, but yeah, trying to quickly shove the negative ones aside and just build on the positive, I guess.
I really like the idea, and I've written a bit about it in the book, in the book that I'm trying to work through, which is that bit about, you know, when you've got something to talk about because it forms a greater part of your identity. And
yeah, for sure.
by forming a greater part of your identity, then you're more invested in what then you're doing as a result, and whether it's a positive, negative, or however it contributes. That one of my parts is like, you know, if you're going to be reading 3 pieces of content a day about your industry or the industry you want to go into, by day 30, you'll have read a decent amount of really interesting stuff. But then when you're speaking to someone at a networking event or just by the by about it, you won't just be, excuse my language, bullshitting. You'll actually be coming from a place of some authority because you've had to think long and hard about what you're doing. In the same way, in a slightly different way, is that when you're doing or owning something yourself, that intrinsic motivation and ownership becomes that much greater too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I've said probably what you were going to say, but I like that bit as well. In what your answer was. So it seems like you're quite good at being able to be, at least from my experience, at sort of being quite focused and habit forming and doing particular things. Have there been other things that you've done, or if there's a particular behavior or a habit or a belief that's changed in a positive way, even if it's a small thing of your life or something in the work or life environment generally?
In what kind of time frame? Do you mean because of COVID, or just like in general?
Just generally, I'm just more thinking if there's anything that like you're like, right, I'm going to change and do this, or I'm going to read at this time, or if I'm going to, that type of stuff.
I think loads of stuff, to be quite honest. It's probably in the last couple of years that I've really started to delve in and become really interested in this stuff. I guess the stuff we're kind of chatting about. I appreciate stuff's a pretty broad word, but I think anyone who's interested in it knows what I mean by this stuff, and that's your habits and your reading and all that kind of thing. And I guess the one thing I wish I had done was someone had thrown a load more books at me at university that weren't to do with my subject and were more to do with productivity and habits and careers and like all the rest of it. I just wish I'd started digesting all that sooner, but better late than never is always the way. So I think the main habit that I think one of your questions was something about what would you put on a billboard, and it'd just be read books. And whether that's through Blinkist or through whatever medium there is, I've found a really good podcast that's called What You Will Learn or something. And it's basically Blinkist, but in a podcast form. And these guys chat for 15-20 minutes about what's in the book. And so you don't have to read entire books because that's quite daunting. But I think if you kind of broaden that, I think read books is just quite like punchy, but I think just consume and kind of always be open to learning and reading. And that's something I wish I kind of really gotten on board with a bit sooner, maybe just in terms of more kind of, I know all my mates make fun of me for reading loads of self-help books, but yeah so but I just wish I'd kind of read some of those sooner, but yeah, like I said, I've really kind of gotten into those and starting to pull those out. So, and I mean, I'm far from perfect. Sometimes I'll go a month without reading, or sometimes I'll get through a load of books. I've actually, my five-a-side team, when we realised we couldn't play five-a-side for lockdown, one of the girls suggested we started a book club, which is kind of almost feels like the opposite of playing five-a-side, but it was brilliant. And it was, again, an opportunity to read books that I would never pick off the shelf like myself, and they're very much like storybooks. But I think any kind of reading is just really worthwhile, and it kind of then comes through into your language. And I think people forget, like, we're writing emails and texts and WhatsApps and everything all day, so, and what you read is always going to influence how that comes across. So I think, yeah, reading's a massive one for me. I like articles and LinkedIn and stuff, so I'm looking over here because I'd made some notes earlier. Yeah, my big one is getting outside. For me, that's really important, just staying active and moving and starting the day off right. I think, like, I'm pretty rubbish in the evenings. For me, I get out quite early, and usually by like the evening I'm completely like wiped out. I know some people find the evenings they're like most productive, but for me that's like, okay, wind down and do it kind of menial tasks or whatever that might be. And the morning's kind of like my sweet spot, so making the most of those mornings, getting outside to start the day. And I peak and trough with doing a bit of like Headspace app and trying to like write in the mornings and stuff. I'm not perfect. I don't always get around to doing it every day, but then I'm getting better at not beating myself up about that either. Just do it when you can. And like say, if you do it 3 times a week, it's better than not doing it at all. So it's a bit of a blend of that, really. And then I'm just a massive fan of, I love writing with like a pen and paper. So I have like a stack of plain sheets of paper, and then at the beginning of the day I just write down, especially like the way our industry is, and like you mentioned, you've got loads of reading to get through and stuff, you just get pulled left, right and centre, and you find yourself, it's really hard to, like you say, focus on the one thing, and you suddenly find that you've started 10 different things, you haven't finished any of them, you don't really know what's going on. So, and again, it doesn't always happen, but I try and write like the 3 things I have to, like the meaty things I have to get done that day. And that's like one of the oldest tricks in the book, right? But I find if you write them down, and I literally just put them, I've got it here, I put them at the top of my page, and I'm like, right, and then at the end of the day I visit them, and if I haven't done them, like, that's fine, they just go back on the top of the list for tomorrow. But I think it just gives you a bit of focus, because otherwise it's easy to, I think emails are worst thing ever. Like they just get you pulled left, right, and center. So I do my best to kind of, if I'm focused on something, phone away, emails away, that kind of thing, and just get what I need to get done. But these are all ideals. They don't always come off, and sometimes things come up, as we all know, with work and whatever else. But yeah, you just have to kind of try your best to implement these things, and hopefully over time they come through and keep you kind of working towards whatever you're aiming towards.
It's interesting as well, because I read a bit of Dan Pink, the book you recommended, wrote a book. I think it's called When or something like that. And it's all to do with productive periods of the day for different people. Mm-hmm. So I know from my experience, I'm pretty good from about 7:30, 8 o'clock when I need to draft and have some proper headspace till 11, 12, a bit lead up to lunch. And then after lunch, then I try and have more meetings and calls. Mm-hmm. to keep myself going a bit, because I know that that's a difficult lull for my brain. And then usually after about 5 o'clock, I'm quite good again. And I quite like having that space of about 9 till 11 p.m. just to have that time to do whatever I want to do on the sort of daily basis.
I think it evolves as your life evolves, right? When you have kids or whatever that might be, like that changes things. Like so, I think it's also being open to changing and trying to realize when those best times are. But
and I think that's a very cool one. And tell me then, so I totally agree on the it's a great billboard, which is read books. I haven't had anything as blunt as that yet, which is actually
read more books. I mean, I can put some fluff around. I can put some fluff around it if you like. But
no, it's really good, because I think Marcus Rashford would be agreeing with you right now, is the truth.
Yeah, I was chatting about it today, actually.
And I think you've got to start in small ways. But I also think the other thing that you were saying about, you wish you'd started earlier, I just wonder whether you might not have had the same urge or passion to do it. It's almost like the timing thing is, timing happens now for that, maybe for a reason sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for certain. I just think a lot of it I could have used when I was like revising at uni and stuff. So it was more like I could have like applied it practically. But then again, like no one, like, you're slammed enough as it is trying to study for your degree and all the rest of it. You then don't want to be the person that's not socializing and sat in your room reading a book. Well, I didn't want to be that person anyways, so each to their own. But yeah, like you say, timing's everything.
No, it's totally right. And look, Jordan, it's been great to chat. I'm sorry we've gone on for a bit longer than expected.
Don't be silly, it's a pleasure.
But it was really good just to sort of hear some of your experiences, how things started off, those sort of interesting motivations and habit sides, and then that billboard. And I think I think that might feature prominently, which is good. It's a self-fulfilling thing of read books, but read my book as well. So.
Yeah. Read books, and you've got like a little asterisk and then in particular.
correct. But actually it's one of the parts of the book, Build Invisible, is actually to make it a repository of book recommendations, based on all the stuff, some things that you've recommended and other books that I've read and recommended out. So almost it becomes that, not focal point, but that point that when you're reading something shortish, that if I say, oh, this bit in this book was great, or Grit, or if it's When Friends Had Influenced People, or if it's 0 to 1, whatever all these cool books are, Atomic Habits, etc., then that provides almost like, that sort of arrow to go, actually, that might be a cool book to read, or this might be something
definitely
cool that might happen as a result. And I never really had that when I was a bit younger, to go, what, look at all of these in different directions.
I think that's a big thing, isn't it? Because it's just so saturated as well. It's a bit mind-boggling when you look at it all and you don't really know where to start. And I think one of the best things that ever happened to me was someone was like, read this. And I didn't have to think about anything else. I was like, okay, like, I've got it. I'm going to read this. And it was just one of my mates who I train with, and she was like, look, this book's brilliant, like go and read it, I've loved it, and just gave it to me. And then you're like, okay, well, that, like, what I need to focus on is getting through that book. So I think maybe the billboard shouldn't be read books, it should be recommend books, because then you're helping other people. So I think that's something like that.
I might use both of those. But also the thing is there on that is that I think then the books take you along the path, just almost like when you listen to a music artist, and then you sometimes have that Apple Music, whatever it is, recommendation based on the algorithm of the stuff you've read, you've listened.
Yeah, definitely.
Almost books then take you along that path. Is like usually every self-help book, development book, references loads of other stuff, and then that resonates, and then you just sort of go and then read. So I wonder actually what that path is, where that first book was and where that current book is potentially now. It should be quite cool to, maybe I can think about exploring. But anyway.
Yeah. Like, I mean, everyone, I guess, has got their kind of web of books of where they've kind of gone from and to, which is quite cool. Yeah, I wasn't allowed to recommend any at the book club.
Because they all had to be fiction, presumably.
Yeah. They wanted, like, we just read Where the Crawdads Sing. It's like a kind of murder kind of thing. It was really great. Like, it was nice storytelling, like really descriptive. Like, it was cool. And I guess you kind of learn things through those. But yeah, they didn't fancy a kind of an Atomic Habits-esque read, where I think a lot of them would have probably just felt, as sometimes I do when I read these things, like just feel a bit guilty for not doing a lot of it. Yeah. And so you're just like, oh, right, okay, just make me feel bad about myself. But yeah.
Interesting. No, I like that as well. Well, that's something to maybe consider as well. But look, thank you very much. Great to chat, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.